This is the reading guide for Monday, December 1st. We are starting a whole new unit now. This is our last unit, and this is on museomics, or DNA analysis of museum specimens. So underlying this entire unit is going to be understanding evolution, in particular evolution as represented on phylogenetic relationships and phylogenetic trees. So we're going to start off the unit by reading this really fantastic article about how to understand evolutionary trees. I particularly like this because although it gives you an introduction to tree thinking, it then goes through and talks about each of the common misconceptions that people have that trip them up when they try to understand trees. So the idea is that you learn from the mistakes that people make right off the bat. So this is supposed to be a great way of learning, so I'm hoping this is going to work really well for you guys too. There are a series of different pieces on YouTube and on Berkeley's website and in this article that you need to be able to complete the RAT. So start with this article, and we're going to jump around a little bit. They're going to give you a background on tree thinking. Here's the famous diagram from Darwin, showing the very first evolutionary tree. This is something you probably see repeatedly in biology classes. You don't need to know exactly how phylogenies are made per se, and that's actually what this says too. You just need to be able to interpret the diagrams to be able to get through this unit. So that's what this is going to do, and I want you to know what a phylogeny is. What a phylogeny is, they give you a definition here, and they supplement that definition throughout the rest of this article. So make sure you're taking note of the different definitions for phylogeny. They talk about issues with creating a tree of life and horizontal gene transfer. These are not going to be things that are particularly relevant to us, and that's sort of up in through here. So unless you're really into biology, you don't need to worry about that too much for our class. They're talking more about what a phylogenetic tree or a phylogeny is here. And then they're going to give you anatomy of a phylogeny. This is a figure to spend a lot of time on. You should know what every single one of these labels points to, what it means, what is an internal node. Is this a living species here or just at the tips? I'll tell you now, just at the tips, right? And these are inferred common ancestors. And this is all written out here in the legend. So read this legend, look at this figure. It's described, of course, in the text here, but spend a lot of time on that. This is really important. A little more about what evolutionary trees are, or phylogenies are, and then they give you just a couple of terms: species, genus, taxon. So this might be helpful if you're not familiar with those and how they're plural or not. This is a really nice, very basic introduction. I would like you to be able to draw on a tree the progression of time on a tree. They talk about the direction of time on a phylogeny. They talk about that quite a bit in here, so I want you to be able to do that as well. Now they get into the real bones of things. Once you know what a tree is and what the different parts are called and what they represent, how do you actually read a phylogenetic tree? They get into the idea of what is a clade, and a clade is a monophyletic group. And they don't use the term monophyly or polyphyly or paraphyly here, but this is something that you're going to need to know to be able to describe the trees and the hypotheses that we're using in this class. So that's where I would refer you to. This is the paper we just looked at. Skip out for a second and go to this phylogenetic terminology link. That's here. This is a graphical explanation of what a monophyletic taxon is, right? I already told you they call it a clade. So what is a clade? What is a paraphyletic grouping, right? It's not a clade, it's a grouping. And then what's polyphyletic? These will make sense as you read them, and then if you try to apply them yourself, they probably won't make sense again. So there's a fantastic demonstration here using an actual tree branch and showing how cutting off different groups of a tree branch can tell you if it's monophyletic, paraphyletic, or polyphyletic. This is clearly a good question for on the quiz to identify one of those. types of groups. So make sure you're comfortable in identifying those three. Okay, now we're going to go back to the paper and keep reading. So do that. Jump out of here, go figure out mono, poly, and paraphyly, and then come back. They make this point in the text, but I want this to be crystal clear to you here in this figure 3. This figure A is a genealogy right here. This is not a phylogeny. One reason it is not a phylogeny, even though they put it phylogeny in quotes over here, is because a parent, an aunt, a grandparent, these internal nodes in a phylogeny are extinct or dead animals or plants, organisms of some sort, right? Here in a genealogy, these things can still be alive. Your parent could be alive. I hope they are, your grandparent and your aunt. So this is not a phylogeny. This is a genealogy. Just be really clear on that. Okay, they then move on down and they talk about the difference between a cladogram and a phylogram. This is important, and it'll come up again. Here's phylogram. It'll come again in a figure. In fact, all these figures are things to spend time on. I'll point out particular ones as we go through, but here we are on figure 5, temporal direction on a phylogeny. This is where I wanted you to be able to draw an arrow, right, from early to recent time, right, from past to present, and so on. You should be able to label that on a tree. You should be able to draw the arrow yourself. Okay, they're going to start talking about how does evolution progress, how is it shown on a tree, this section. So here we get into the misconceptions, higher and lower. Are some animals higher than others? Are they more evolved? Are they more advanced? Are they more primitive or less primitive? So read this section and be sure that you can answer that kind of a question. Misconception 2, mainline and side tracks. This is very much related to this idea of evolutionary advancement. Here they give you an example, figure 7, of unbalanced trees. Are these trees showing all the same relationships, or are they different? You'll want to be able to identify the relationships among individuals on a tree. So double check and see if this is the same or not. Here's a good test for you. Which of these is a cladogram and which is a phylogram? See if you can figure that out before you read the legend here. Okay, misconception 3, reading across the tips. This is another important one. This is how do you read a phylogenetic tree? Is it relationship? So are V and X more closely related because they're close to each other on this tree, or are W and X more closely related? That's a question you'll want to be very comfortable answering, and you should be able to get that through reading misconception number 3. These figures get a little bit out of order here. Figure 10 goes back to the idea of mainlands and side tracks, but you're going to want to pay attention to that figure. That's a great figure. I'm talking about the progress of evolution and if it's linear and so on. Keep moving through here, and each of these figures, spend time on them. The rat is full of figures and interpreting figures, so make sure that you could answer questions about this figure without the legend, and this figure, for instance. Not necessarily these particular ones, but any of the figures in this paper, especially ones I've just pointed out before, this could be important. I think that's all of the notes I have. I want to point out one more thing in here before we finish, and that is the branch lengths. So we talked about the difference between a cladogram and a phylogram. A phylogram shows you amount of divergence. So the length of a branch may correspond to number of evolutionary changes, but I want to point out what this figure is saying in that each of these branches, right, leading to a species, each species has been evolving for exactly the same amount of time. If you were to add up the branch length from this divergence to this species, that's letter A is equal to B plus D, so the frog has been evolving for D plus B time. This maybe salamander or lizard is G plus E plus C plus B, same amount of time as A. So make sure you're comfortable with that idea. And that's all the notes I have on this one. So once you finish this, I want you to go back to Moodle, and you have one last thing that you can do, and that is this really cool interactive video. I like it because it gives you a chance to test yourself. It'll show you some questions, and then it'll give you a chance to answer. And so you would click here to answer the question, and it'll take you to the next video, which poses another question. So I think it's about 3 videos that give you a chance to test yourself. Can you answer questions about evolutionary trees? So I hope that will help make you more prepared for the rat. And let's double check that we've done everything on Moodle. I think we're pretty good. So you've looked at the paper, you jumped out and looked at the terminology, then you watched this video with this guy with a tree branch and some pruning shears, and then you can test yourself with the interactive video. So that's it, and I'll see you in class. I hope you're having a great break. Don't forget to submit your paper. There'll be a new assignment online. All right, take care.